request all of you to rise for the national anthem.
भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल गंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तब जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
Good evening, friends. It is my privilege today to introduce our illustrious guest here. Ms. Rashna Imhasly-Gandhy has an interesting background. She is an Indian-born Jungian analyst and also a transpersonal psychologist. And this gives her a unique perspective, which is a combination of Eastern wisdom and Western psychology. She has a vast experience of therapeutic practice, teaching and conducting workshops across the globe. She has worked with diverse groups, including in conflict zones, bringing psychological explorations into spaces of healing and transformation. Rashna has written a few books, I think 3 books, based on her area of expertise. Her latest book, Courage to Be You, continues this trajectory by weaving Jungian insights with narrative to explore identity, courage, and self-discovery in contemporary India. Today, she will be in conversation with practicing psychologist Krishna Varya, whose work mainly centers around survivors of violence and sexual abuse, and also those facing terminal illness. Krishna was just telling me that she has 5 years of experience, and I tell you, it's very hard to believe. She looks so young. They will talk about her new book, which delves deep into the conflict one faces between living true to oneself and conforming to societal norms. So, I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting conversation. Before we begin this talk, I would like to welcome Mr. Paparao Garu and Ms. Malti Garu to come on stage to release the book. Vikram also.
Look here, first off, everyone look here. మీరు కూడా జాయిన్ అయిపోండి. Yeah, everyone look here. Yeah. Madam, everyone look here. Okay, thank you.
Rashna Imhasly-Gandhy. Today we will be introducing her third and latest book, The Courage to Be You, an exceptional work that is a unique blend of spirituality, psychotherapy and mythology in a story that pushes boundaries of external limitations to look within in order to find the courage to be you. So on that note, let's dive right in. And Rashna, why don't you tell us what this book is all about? Tell us a little about the characters.
Well, I'm a Jungian psychologist. I don't know if you've heard of Carl Gustav Jung. He was Freud's almost successor, and then they fell apart after a while, and he started his own theory. And having been married to a Swiss, I was in Switzerland, and I got to learn about Jung, and was very interested in Jungian psychology. And we'd come back to India, and I discovered, I discovered that I had a lot of clients in psychology who were married. One was Priya and the other not. Now, the reason for that was there's a lot of shame in this respect, and parents used to hide behind this. So one would be clear and the other wouldn't. Would have a partner who is a Muslim. I take the Hindu-Muslim aspect also into the question because there's a lot of discrepancy there. And then I take Rajeshwari, who has been sexually abused when she was young because her family had misused her, and how we heal these two different personalities and the stories emerges how we bring them to heal themselves. So basically, that was the backdrop of the book. And I want to say that as we progress through the chapters to heal them, it's not necessarily the story of those two, but I've taken different aspects of healing with different people, but they're true episodes which are there, how we heal them. So it's fictionalized, but showing how healing takes place.
And these are taken from accounts of stories that you worked with, like clients that you worked with,
Yes. Yeah.
and of course, anonymous and fictional.
Yes.
Why this story and why now? Why is it relevant today?
Well, basically, I saw so much suffering, which only we seem to see behind closed doors. What kind of life do they lead behind these closed doors? There's so much secrecy. There's a kind of shame, and the parents basically put their shame onto the children. That they don't want to admit that their children one may be gay, and so it's the whole thing of hiding this whole secrecy. And then I got to see through therapy what these people go through. I mean, it's really sad stories, and how we can heal them, and how they can change, how there is a way to bring them, to listen to their inner voice and to change and to reform and come out in the open and find their own partners. So that's how I decided to make a kind of story of these two and how they find their own partners.
How did you come about writing this book? Can you tell us a little about your journey going through this?
Well, I also went through a difficult moment in my life. I was all of 21, and I fell in love with a person who was not from my religion. He was a Swiss, he happens to be here. And much against my family. Actually, my grandfather was Zoroastrian, and very, very against the whole my getting married. And he told my father that, in fact, you will have to leave the house if you allow her. I'm not going to allow this to happen at all. And he had even stopped my grandmother from going into other people's marriages if they were marrying outside the caste system of the Parsis or the Zoroastrian. And so my father said, look, you will get married and go away, but what am I going to do? We'll be in a fix, we have a joint family and so on. So I decided, my father used to go to Swami Nityananda for all his problems when he had a strike in his company or so. I said, why don't you go and ask Baba? So we went to Baba and he listened and he said, well, where is the boy? He
He's in Switzerland. So he said, without seeing him, I can't make any judgment. All the boys, let him come. So, the student, both of us, young, in love, not caring a hang about anything, he came over and we went to Baba, and Baba had one look at him. His heart is all right. Then my father said that what do I do with my father? He's going to throw me out of the house and so on. So he said, yeah. So then going home, my father said, now you go and tell the old man. So I went up and I said, look, Baba is going to give the Ashirvad in the ashram. All I want is your Ashirvad. But he said, yes, but you're putting your gun on my chest and you're taking my Ashirvad. Anyway, so that was my journey, and somehow or the other, my grandfather, even though he didn't belong to, the ashram or believe in the Guru, he knew he had to relent. And I didn't realize then that I had started my journey of what we call in psychology the journey of individuation. That was my journey that I started. And I started to look at that aspect, how we can find our inner voice and have the strength to go ahead. So that's how.
So interesting that you had a personal journey of individuation, also corresponding with all your learnings from Kali. Did you have any other philosophical, literary, or other influences that shaped this work?
Yeah, because I started studying Jung at that time back in Switzerland. I was very much into human psychology, and I started to see the archetypes of the unconscious. And archetypes are repeating patterns, which you can see in journeys. And Joseph Campbell he was a Jungian too, and he wrote an absolutely fabulous book called Hero with 1,000 Faces. And there he takes cross-cultural myths throughout, the world, and shows how individuation happens at different stages of one's life. And I found that so fascinating to see that, my God, there is, archetypes are not just mythologies, but they are actually stories of humans which have, when an archetype is awakened, there's a storyline, and there are path breakers, and there are different stages of consciousness. And what I also started to see was that basically archetypes are such stories that you can use even in films, and that films also show how you can break a certain rule and how you get to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. They're stages of consciousness, basically.
And Campbell also talks about that in his book.
Yeah, that's the basic book that shows cross-cultural mythology.
How did your professional psychotherapy journey begin? To tell us a bit about that and your therapeutic approach in the sessions with clients.
Basically, Jung is also considered a transpersonal psychologist. Now, what is transpersonal psychology? There was a conference in Bombay in 1979 where transpersonal psychology came from the West Coast, California, and they gave a conference in Bombay. And they had invited people like, of course, Swami Nityananda was one of them, and my father's office in the gallery was his back office. Then we had Parsi priest, head priest, who was invited. Then we had Dalai Lama. What on earth has psychology to do with all these spiritual people coming here? I had no idea. So my father said that since you're so interested in Jungian psychology, why don't you come to the conference? And I came to that conference, and it was a life-changing moment for me, because at the end of the conference, I saw that psychology was so close to spirituality, and that the spiritual path they had brought together. And Stan Groff, who was the president of the transpersonal psychology, at the end of the conference said, is there anybody, we take these conferences to different parts of the world, is there anybody who would like to take it to their country? Please put your hand up. And I put my hand up. And the next conference was in Switzerland. And for 18 months, we had people coming from California, and I got to do the training.
Due to the lack of exercise, I put on weight, so the doctor suggested that I see a therapist. I hate my body and I can't seem to lose any weight.
You may just happen to be an introvert and enjoy your own company. There's nothing wrong in that. Many children don't know the reason for their excess weight. But fat can also be an armor to protect young persons from being hurt. There may be deeper reasons why you hate your body.
What do you mean by deeper reasons?
Well, while you were growing up, what were the kind of friendships that you had? Were they with boys or girls?
I had very few friendships. I used to prefer reading rather than playing football or cricket. I grew up with one friend who is the daughter of my parents' best friend, but she's like a sister. She's close, but in a fraternal way. I've never had any romantic relationship with anybody so far, and I do not feel any romantic inclinations towards her either.
Well, I'd like to close your eyes and ask you to think about people you may have admired while you were growing up. Persons from whom you felt a kind of passion to be friends with, or which you may have admired.
With his eyes closed.
It's very important to close the eyes, because it's the same REM movement that we do, the part of the brain that we use in dreams, because you're seeing images. So that's why the eyes closed. Go ahead.
Of course, I had plenty of people I fantasized about, but there were always people who I was sure would never be interested in me.
In your fantasy, were they male or female?
Well, as a boy, I had no chance to know any females except this one sister-like person that I grew up with. Most of the people I grew up with were boys. I was in a boys' school, so it was mainly boys I fantasized about. But they were not the ones I interacted with daily. These remained shadow figures in my mind.
Amit, I would like to ask you one question. What do you think about homosexuality and romantic relationships between persons of the same sex?
Well, I think it is a crime, and I have grown up in a boys' school where they made fun of boys who we all called pansies. So I began to hate such people too.
Amit, has it ever occurred to you that you grew up in an atmosphere where you were conditioned to be homophobic?
In a visibly shocked state, his eyes filling up with sudden realization that it may be the truth, but he's afraid to face it. Oh my God, you seem to have touched something very deep. I never realized that I hate homos and used to look down upon them and judge them. But I may be one myself, and yet I would hate to discover that I am.
Why do you hate them? What's wrong in loving somebody of the same sex?
Well, firstly, until recently it was against the law in our country. I know this has changed now after the Supreme Court has scrapped Article 377 of the Indian Penal Code. However, people still look down on homosexuals and do not respect those who have come out openly. In school, we used to call them queer, and this is not going to change just because the law has been scrapped recently.
I would like to now consider the question, who made these laws in the first place? Were they made by man or by God? And which God made these laws? If such laws are man-made, how can human beings play God and forbid something that nature has given us namely the inclination to love a person of the same sex.
But then those who have come out today are still looked down upon.
In whose eyes?
In the eyes of my parents and relatives to myself, and all the people whom I knew and grew up with in school, the teachers, the students, and the friends that I made since.
Amit, does that mean that you are not against chalet? I was working on a client and I put on Karnataka music, and between one song and the second song, music stops, and this myth is coming across on the radio to me. I said, excuse me, this is an amazing story. And then of course I researched it, and it's such an extraordinary story that completes the book. Because our Indian philosophy, they treat these archetypes that are human in a human way. They don't forbid anything, because it's part of growing, it's part of our transformation. And this is such a beautiful myth. So maybe we read it quickly. And the birth of Hariharaputra. The Sabrimala Ayappa temple in Kerala, South India is one of the most intriguing pilgrimage sites in Hinduism because it transgresses gender lines, attracting millions of devotees every year. The temple is dedicated to Lord Ayappan, a deity known for his association with Dharma and righteousness and asceticism. The story of the temple is deeply intertwined with mythology, tradition, and religious practices. The South Indian myth of Shiva marrying Vishnu in the form of Mohini and producing a child, Ayappan, offers a profound insight into societal values. The story symbolizes the alluring power of Maya, or illusion. According to Hindu mythology, Lord Ayappan is the son of Shiva and the divine feminine energy Mohini, an avatar of Lord Vishnu. The story begins with the churning of the ocean, the Samudra Manthan. The gods and the demons to obtain the nectar of immortality or the Amrit. During this process, Lord Vishnu takes the form of Mohini, a beautiful enchantress, to distract the demons and ensure that the gods receive the nectar. It's believed that Ayappan was born from the union of Shiva and Mohini, embodying the combined powers of both gods. Now, what is the symbolism of the churning of the ocean? It's the process of individuation. The churning of the ocean is a metaphor for this process, which we in Jungian psychology call individuation. The process involves the stirring up of the unconscious ocean, bringing forth the elixir of immortality or self-realization through the integration of opposites, the gods and the demons. They're not some demons outside ourselves, they're the demons within. In other words, the nectar of immortality, which is obtained through the churning, symbolizes the ultimate goal of individuation and the achievement of wholeness, the emergence of the real self, the central archetype in Jungian psychology, representing the fully integrated personality. The myth of Shiva and Vishnu as Mohini, the birth of Ayappan, is a rich allegory of the Jungian process of individuation. The interplay between the masculine and the feminine principles, the confrontation with the shadow, and the ultimate emergence of the divine child which is born from this union, which is Ayappa. It illustrates the journey towards self-realization and the integration of the different aspects of the psyche. Each god archetype in the myth serves as a symbol to the key elements of this psychological process, offering deep insights into the nature of consciousness, duality, and the path to wholeness. Now, every person in the myth, I'm not going to read the whole myth because you already have to, those who are interested will read it for yourselves. Jungian symbolism of Ayyappan, the child born of Shiva and Mohini, represents the archetype of the divine child. He becomes the hero, the new emerging self in the story. In Jungian terms, the divine child symbolizes the potential for growth, renewal, and the future self. A new consciousness that arises from the union of opposites of the Shiva and Mohini.
Goes to show how evolved these symbolisms were back then, pre-Victorian sort of morality that crept into our society, how inclusive it was, not barring gender lines and binary, even way back then. Very interesting stories to read. Speaking of myths, a paragraph that really made me pause and think in the second chapter. I'd really like to read that. It's very short. But the fact that Amit had got the first signal of acceptance and compassion from his psychoanalyst, who acts as his mentor on the hero's journey, allows him to enter a new space. And we're talking about very real world issues that we're dealing with in a modern day psychotherapy setting. And since we were talking about myths, it sort of made me pause there to think, Rashna, would it be fair to draw a parallel here with the role of Narada in the myth of Ayyappan?
Yeah. So, Ayyappa is there and Narada is good. It was very strange, very beautiful. And so he had these conversations with his, what we call the higher self or the Antaratma in Indian philosophy. So many years later, an Indian who was Gandhiji's follower came to see him, and you asked him, do you have a guru? And he said, yeah. He said, who? He said, Shankaracharya. So he said, Shankaracharya, you mean the one who wrote the Vedas many years ago, many centuries ago? He said, yes. So he said, you mean you imagine him? He said, yes, I do. I talk to him. He gives me answers. So Jung said, oh, I hit upon something that the Indians use as a Antaratma. And so in our therapy work also, we work a lot, not giving our clients answers, but asking them to get in touch with that part of themselves. And so that is the way I try to help people to find their inner voice. And yes, it's going to take a long time to change. We can't change the collective unconscious that has been working for so many years in our country. We can't fight that. But change is happening in the rest of the world, and it will affect us. And slowly we will come to that with patience and hope. So on that hope,
So necessary today.
I think we can open it to questions. When I came to India, I didn't know anything about Indian mythology. And I found that Indian mythology is so incredible because it's so often the same. Like Eros, and this book came out called Psychology of Love, Wisdom of Indian Mythology. And Eros and Kama have very similar archetypal behavior pattern. The only difference is that Kama, same as Eros, but also has these arrows and causes confusion in people and so on. But even though Kama manages to unsettle Shiva, who is the great meditator, and at one stage Shiva says, enough is enough, and he burns it with his third eye, and he becomes MANTHAN. It's so incredible how transformation happens in the Indian myths, whereas in the Greek ones, Eros remains this little boy throwing arrows. The archetype doesn't really change. So I thought it's nice to show the transformation. it's come out as a new edition of the first book.
She had spoken in MANTHAN in 2012, if I remember right. And so when I got a call from Shireen saying that she's written a new book, I immediately said yes, because I distinctly remember now 14 years ago. I distinctly remember after your speech, me and Ajay had dinner and we were discussing your speech for almost 2 hours after you spoke. I fondly, actually now I'm missing Ajay. I think you would have enjoyed what you said, and thank you for making what I thought was a very complicated subject. But thank you, I think all of us understood what we're trying to say, and it's only a great mind like you can make it so simple in such a fascinating subject. Thank you very much for that. I'm really, I don't know, my words fail because last 1 hour listening to you, and it's been very, very. I thought it was something which I will never understand. Frankly, now I think that I have a toehold in the whole topic, and thank you for that. Any questions?
Hello, thank you for this very thoughtful conversation. I just have one question. I'm not very familiar with Young's work, but I'm curious to know what someone who's working from that perspective. What are your thoughts on Carl Rogers' ideas of real self and ideal self? I'm just curious to hear your opinion.
You studied
Yes.
I haven't, so I'm not going to comment.
If I can take that,
Yeah.
talking about humanistic perspectives, giving unconditional positive regard to your clients. I mean, it's not that there's an absolute divide. I think in most theories of psychotherapy, there's some overlap, usually. But well, you went quite a bit into Philemon and the higher self, and it was of course because of contemporary of Freud, that whole era was a little deep into this stuff. Rogerian work is something most of us do, irrespective, because there's no place as a therapist in a setting of psychotherapy where sort of help out of that, and it's really helpful to embody those principles that we talked about. Because one of the best ways to get to someone, giving them unconditional positive regard, and in some sense, it does tie into what we call co-regulation with the energy exchange in that sense. And energy exchange is also what we're talking about here with the chakras and the energy body of the individual. So it all ties in together somewhere.
So is Rogers studied in India? Okay. I didn't study in India, so I couldn't answer that question. I studied in Switzerland and in America. So sorry. She was
In a pre-Victorian era, which I think lasts for about 3,000 years, we seem to have accepted this as a part, this conflict as a part of our society, our tradition, and our mythology. How is it that in a matter of 200 years we changed? I mean, why was it so fragile that we now have difficulties in accepting it? What went wrong, or what was happening here?
It's, when several people are taught certain things, just to give you an idea, when the Khajuraho temples were discovered during the British time, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a letter publicly saying that it's a very decadent period of Indian Hindu mythology. And Rabindranath Tagore wrote again in the newspaper to say that Gandhiji, you should go deeper into your philosophy to voice your views. And Gandhiji again in the newspaper apologizing. So it was already happening the culture was being changed through the collective behavior of the Christianity framing, and what is allowed and what is not allowed, and what is legal, illegal. And so you start to, through the schooling and through the collective behavior, our minds in the end are our computers, and whatever is fed into the computer, we start to believe. And so the mind slowly started changing, and we lost our ancient wisdom, which I think we need to go back to, because there's so much transformation in our midst, it's not funny. They're profound.
To Mohi's Shiva's story, but it could really explain why Ayappa's temple only men are allowed. Since you've read up so much on the mythology, maybe you can explain that. And if you allow me another question, Vikram, I'll ask another one. Vikram, one more question. The other question is, we're just talking about the opening of the string towards same gender sex. We also had Draupadi, who had 5 husbands and she was respected, and now that in North India is totally different. Women are not allowed to come out from that kind of spirit of freedom and to something less than a slave. I think our society has traveled back a lot. And we had even writers, it's called Walla, she wrote Ramayana. So we had people who wrote books and they were accepted. Today again, not today, some time back, women again had a problem with that. Again, the today society. Just your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, it's the whole subject of women not going into temples and so on is something that is being held as a very sacred thing for a very long time. And so it's got mixed up with who Ayappa is as a deity. Actually, he has reached the highest chakra because he is the hero in the myth. The different stages of transformation, and he's arrived, sort of. He's the new hero who is Tattvam Asi. He is that. He knows who he is. This is God in all. So to reject women, of course, is strange. And the Lord did try to change it. But there is also this age-old belief that women pollute. When you go into a temple, even in our Zoroastrian custom, when we have our period, we're not allowed to go in, or you're told not to go in. So you just believe that, But basically, Ayappa came down to, if you look at the myth, I'm only talking about the myth, I'm not talking about what goes on in our heads and how we transform those beliefs. But I'm talking about what he's saying is that he has ultimately reached liberation. So, of course, it would be great if women would also be allowed to go and also, worship that part of themselves. But it will take time. It's not going to happen now because these beliefs are so deep within us. And the Supreme Court tried to change it, and it didn't happen. And in fact, I wrote a letter to Shashi Tharoor because he was sitting with the Supreme Court judge at one of the lit fests, and he was saying that he tried to imbibe this, but that the women themselves said they wouldn't do it. So he said, it's not yet time. Who am I to sit there and tell them what to do? We had sati in our, and it took a long time to change. So these things we can't change from one day to another, and we have to try to, with consciousness, to see what the meaning of the true myth is. What is it trying to say? What is the truth? and bring those opposites together instead of just, fighting with each other. Right? And she's a, I think, wonderful figure. I written about Draupadi very much in the emerging feminine. I've written quite extensively in
Relates to the earlier question about how Victorian ideals came in during colonial times, and but also I was thinking about it in the context of decolonial therapists and how they're approaching the importance of community in therapy, and not just being focused on therapizing the individual, but thinking about how important it is for transformation in the collective for healing to take place. So I wonder, when, for instance, if we're thinking about the liberation of queer people in Indian society, whether just thinking about how queer people can be supported to sort of live an authentic life for themselves is enough, and whether it's just as important, if not more important, to bring about social transformation in the way that because it can often be very, very huge inhibition to healing when extremely important figures in your life, like your parents, are not accepting of who you are as a person.
I do agree with that a lot because the parent generation is so steeped in what they think is right, and society is moving on, and the new inputs that are coming, especially at the rate at which we are looking at media and the way AI is affecting us and the way things are changing at such a fast. I mean, the parents are aghast, they can't accept what's going on, and to see how fast things are changing. And I see that in therapy all the time. And I do think that it's so important that we have, more social movements where they can, I agree with you that it should move at a faster rate. It would be for the youth. That's why I felt I had to write this book for the youth. And I'm glad to say that it's doing very well because I just heard from one article that came out that suddenly they've run out of copies in Amazon, so that's a good sign.
Can I also say, very much in alignment with what you're saying over there, the importance of decolonizing therapy is monumental because it's really such a struggle and such a mark of frustration that each of us go through. A lot of fellow therapists feel this way when we're working with individuals who are oppressed by so many discriminating factors. There's caste, there's gender, there's just marginalization based on so many different things, economic status, and however much you work with the individual week by week, I mean, there's a certain amount of transformation that does happen, yes. But the hyperfixation on, yes, we will only work with the individual and the problem is only yours. The problem is you. I think this would be a wasted platform if I don't bring up this point of systemic struggle, which I think is something you're alluding to there. Because you work so hard with an individual and they hit a roadblock, and you work a little while, they hit a roadblock, and those roadblocks are not only their own, they're also imposed by all these restrictions from society, from the collective unconscious, which is what we were talking about here, that confine the person within those bounds and put you in a box, and a Dalit is always a Dalit, and a transgender person is always a transgender person, and the idea that there is equal opportunity out there is as much of a myth as it ever was. And I'm saying this here today because we're not just psychologists here, we're people from all walks of life, and as someone who's seeing this, working with people on a day-to-day basis, I think it's really important for us to be thinking about these things and thinking about what we can do towards shifting this sort of narrative, shifting these ideas of putting people in these confines, and expanding our horizons to be more inclusive, to be more innovative of others and uplifting of others rather than putting them in boxes and making us.
You know, the stories that come out of Lavji, for instance, all the time in the newspaper, because they're the wrong, the wrong caste or the wrong Hindu or Muslim, and what people go through. And love is an energy, it's an archetype, you can't help it, and yet it's so difficult to bridge that in our multicultural thing. And this myth of Ayyappan, he has a mentor who's a Muslim. And it's such an inclusive, beautiful myth, because Baba, first he fights him, then he becomes his mentor, and then they both transform together. And even today, I think the person who is from South India, you will know that when you do the Sabrimala pilgrimage, even today, you first have to go to the Muslim mosque and pay your obeisance, do the thing, come back, again pay your obeisance. It's bringing Hindu-Muslim unity. Such a beautiful part. And this is what we have to work on, not divide and rule. This is transcendence. This is what we have to do.
People attending here today, maybe 20% are youth, and sorry, I'm not saying senior citizens here, but the question, ma'am, is we're talking about shadow, mask, integrating to individualization process and everything. As a 40-year-old, I find it very hard to, like in your story, Amit, to have a proper conversation with people of my age. They wouldn't understand what I'm trying to say. Our country is primarily youngsters, and if they are going to lead us into the future globally, individually, few people cannot uplift the collective conscious. And today, when the whole world is choosing wrong heroes, say Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whoever, who are only chasing glory and success, not individualization or going inside to seek truth. How we as a society, and maybe Manthan as a small community, can help bring that awareness in the today's youth. Because they're all doom scrolling, spending time on reels, and wasting thousands of hours on social media. So how do you see that while we as individuals can do our 2 cents in our own families, collectively how can we, may not be even, I'm not even talking about improving the collective conscious, how can we ensure that it won't deteriorate further?
And see that we don't do the same thing to our children and our future. I have been doing group work also, and have tried a lot through the group therapy to spread ideas of change, because it's so unnecessary when we are so caught up in what we think the next generation should do, and the change is happening so fast, and there's so much suffering when we are not accepting this change that's coming about. And each one of us has to do our best in whatever way. And I think you were telling me that you're doing it through companies that you represent, where you use this kind of thing. Would you like to talk about that? How you use it? I was so surprised to hear that you use Indian. My idea was to spread this story. I wanted to write a script and make a film because today nobody reads books. And I thought it would be much better to write I wanted this to be a film script. I realized that by stage and that many people see the film rather than read a book. But I realized I'm not a script writer, so I'm hoping, and I've written it in the introduction, that I hope that someday somebody will read this and make a film out of it, because then a bigger crowd will be able to get the idea.
Should move towards rationality and empathy for others. That would be a better mantra than focusing on chakras or energy or even, because in my understanding, religion will teach you 100 good things, but then follow up with the most blatant misogyny you'll ever see in your life. So to say that, we can take examples of IFA or banning women from going there, which is already resolved in 2018, but for years it has been that custom that women were not allowed in that sacred space. So I would say that instead of even considering mythology or energy or chakras or psychotherapy or spirituality or anything related to some normal understanding of our society, I would say that move towards rationality, move towards understanding human behavior, move towards having empathy for others. This would result in a much more better society and our life altogether. So yeah, that would be.
Thank you. I think it's a nice word.
Thank you, everyone.
Madam, turn, madam. Turn. Okay, hand over.
March 7th, Tony Joseph will be speaking to us. The notification will come tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.